Hi guys, today I would like to share with you a couple of ideas on how you can develop vertical interest in your balcony or container garden. This is something I completely ignored at the beginning of my gardening journey, and I feel like the moment I actually started to incorporate some of those ideas I'm about to share with you today, I feel like my balcony started to look a lot less like an urban balcony and a little bit more like a real garden. Because when we plant a lot of plants in similar sized pots, it can quickly turn into a flat, knee-high display. And height and dimension is really important no matter how small or large your garden is. And I feel like in a real garden situation, you can achieve that vertical interest pretty effortlessly because, in a real garden, we can just plant a tall tree, large shrub, you build some pergola, you add some garden arch, and you have vertical interest. And in container gardens, especially balcony gardens, where the space is usually very limited and you can only work with pots and containers, it definitely requires a little bit more creativity. But container gardening has many advantages that you can use to elevate your plant display, to take it up a notch. So let me share with you a couple of my favorite tricks. If the space allows, consider planting smaller or dwarf trees. This can immediately add a sense of maturity to your garden, and they also extend your planting scheme upwards. And some of the most common, easiest and slow-growing trees for container gardens are Japanese maples. They have beautiful leaf shape, and they come in many lovely colors, and then obviously they have this beautiful graceful form. But if maples don't do well in your climate or in your balcony garden conditions, there are also many lovely small dwarf conifers that are really easy to grow, very adaptable, and they are also evergreen, so they provide also beautiful winter interest. Bamboos or taller perennial grasses could also be good options. Tip number 2, if you garden in a really small space and even a small tree sounds like too much, then you can always opt for trees and shrubs trained into topiaries, into standards, or into slim, narrow forms like cordons, because these will add height without adding bulk, without taking up too much space. And better yet, if you want to get the best of both worlds, plant a fruit tree or a shrub trained into topiary or into a cordon, because then not only you are adding height, but you also are rewarded with your own homegrown fruit. Tip number 3, use empty walls to grow climbing shrubs and vines. Plant stuff like roses, clematis or passion flower. These are perennial, so you can grow them in your garden for many years, but they can take some time before they mature, before they actually provide that vertical interest and before they produce an abundance of flowers. So if you need more rapid results or you are more interested in switching it up a little bit, trying new plants each year, then opt for annual vines, something like climbing nasturtiums, mandevilla, black-eyed Susan or morning glory. But many of these plants will require some sort of support to help them climb up the wall. So if the space is limited or maybe you are working with some weird angle, then I highly recommend these adhesive hooks. I use them in my own garden as well, and not only they are pretty much invisible, but they also won't damage the surface and you can easily remove them, but at the same time they are pretty durable. Tip number 4, use a vertical planter. These not only add height to your garden, but they also lift your plants off the floor, help you optimize your floor space, and grant you a lot more vertical space for growing either food or ornamental plants. And there are many models available on the market. I am very happy with this wooden planter that I picked recently for my garden. But that being said, there are many other options. There are smaller ones, there are more narrow ones that rotate, so definitely a lot of options out there that you can pick for your garden. Tip number 5 is raising pots up. This is one of my earliest tricks, and this just brings your plant display to a whole new level. Alright, so take a look at this shade corner that I created here on my balcony. As you can see, we have a little game of textures, of shades of green, but also of height and dimension. So now I'm going to show you the same display without using pot risers. So it doesn't necessarily look bad because we still have that game of textures and colors, but it definitely lacks height and dimension. Like, we can't see anymore those individual plants as well as before, and it's all kind of, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's all kind of flat and knee high, especially that bottom part if we remove the Japanese maple. So I use many different things as pot risers, but mostly some old chairs or some individual pot risers that you can buy online, but mostly unused pots. If the space allows, you could also opt for a smaller shelving unit and display your plants there, or maybe some smaller potting bench, or just upcycle old furniture like nightstands or chairs and stuff like that. Next idea is a DIY ladder. This is something I created spontaneously many years ago, and it's been on my balcony ever since, and I think it's been like 7 years now. And I think it looks really cute and really rustic just on its own, doesn't take up pretty much any floor space at all, and provides a really lovely vertical accent. But there's actually many creative ways you could also use it. You can use it as a support for your climbing plant. You can use it as a rack to dry your herbs and flowers in summer. You can wrap a string of fairy lights on it, and in winter you can decorate it with evergreen branches to add a bit of holiday spirit to your balcony garden. Next idea are hanging pots. Now, I don't have any typical hanging baskets in my garden because we can't mount anything on the wall, but with the aid of hanging baskets and wall-mounted planters, you can actually gain a ton of interest and a lovely pop of color. You can switch those compositions up from one season to another. There's one huge disadvantage of this type of planters is that the soil dries out pretty rapidly, but there's a couple of tricks you can use to cut down on watering. Firstly, you can create your own custom water-retaining potting mix recipe. I shared my own recipe recently on my channel, and then you can also line them with a plastic bag to prevent that soil from drying out too rapidly. Another idea are obelisks. I get asked a ton how I train my ivy into this beautiful cone shape, and the secret is I use the metal obelisk. So these are easily available at most garden centers. You can find them online. They come in different shapes, in different heights, so you can choose one that suits your space and your style. And you can either grow annual vines on them, and then once those annual vines are done, I highly encourage you to even leave those obelisks in your pots, even if they are empty, there's nothing growing on them. I think that just on their own, they provide a beautiful vertical accent and a beautiful winter interest, winter structure as well. Or you can grow evergreen vines on them, like for example, different species of hedera, so ivy. There are many beautiful ones to choose from. These are really low maintenance, very adaptable, and also very winter hardy. But don't forget that they are evergreen, so they will need just a tiny bit of water throughout the winter to not dry out completely. Number 9 are expandable bamboo trellises. Here again, they are really easily available at most garden centers, at hardware stores, or you can buy them from Amazon. And they can actually serve many purposes at the same time. So they could serve you as a privacy screen, as a windbreak. You can use them to grow either annual vines or evergreen vines. I'm growing Hedera Helix Gold Heart that will soon transform this trellis into a beautiful green wall. But you could also use it to grow edibles such as peas or beans, and you can also use it as a framework to hang some smaller planters and grow either smaller veggies or flowers. And finally, number 10, I left this feature at the end because it is a pretty large feature, but if you can afford it space-wise, I highly encourage you to add a garden arch to your balcony or terrace garden. I did not realize how much my garden needed that vertical accent until I actually bought it, and mine is still pretty bare at this point because on this side I have Clematis jackmanii that is just done blooming, but it is still pretty young and pretty small plant. And then on the other side I have a climbing rose that's also not blooming at the moment, unfortunately, but it's also a very small plant, so I will probably have to wait probably about 2 years or so before this arch actually starts to look a little bit more full and gives my garden that kind of secret garden vibe. But it doesn't take as much floor space as it may seem. For example, I secured mine into 2 larger pots on each side, but it obviously does take up a lot of vertical space. But if you can afford it space-wise, highly encourage you to add a garden arch to your balcony garden. Alright, so here are my 10 ideas on how you can add vertical interest to your balcony or container garden. Hope that you found some inspiration in today's video. If you did, I would appreciate if you could give it a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to my channel for more container gardening content. Happy gardening, and see you again in the next video.